Hey guys, tonight is really a night to let your imagination step back tens of thousands of years to a world where shadows flicker on rough stone walls, smoke curls in the air, and firelight paints the faces of our ancestors with golden warmth. Imagine it, the deep night sky outside a cave or a hut, wolves howling in the distance, but inside there is safety. Sparks leap from burning logs, embers glow like rubies, and small groups of people gather, close their eyes wide and bright as they share stories, laugh, and plan their next move. That fire is more than heat. It is their center of gravity. And I think you'd last only 3 seconds before running for your life when you saw the prey our ancestors used to hunt. But here, in the circle of firelight, courage brews like a strong tea, and intelligence sharpens like a flint. Don't forget to subscribe and share this channel with someone who loves soft bedtime stories. Tonight, let your mind drift along with us, and may this soothing story help you find the sweetest dreams. If you're listening now, take a moment to share in the comments how you're feeling, what small worries you're holding on to. Sometimes saying it out loud helps them feel lighter, almost like throwing a stone into the flames and watching it disappear in sparks. Close your eyes if you like, feel your shoulders drop, and allow my voice to guide you into a calm, cozy world tonight. The story begins here. The firelight not only warms frozen hands, it awakens minds. Fire is often credited as one of the single greatest inventions of humankind, but calling it an invention almost undersells it. It wasn't just discovered once, it was mastered. Prehistoric humans learned to strike stone against stone, to tame wild flames from lightning-struck trees, and eventually to carry burning embers from one camp to another, as though they were holding the very heart of the sun. In that fire there was warmth and light, yes, but also a classroom, a stage, and perhaps the first laboratory. Think about it. Around the fire, language has room to grow. It's hard to hold a meaningful conversation while sprinting away from a charging rhinoceros, but in the calm glow of evening, people could mimic animal calls shape. Words laugh at mistakes and correct one another. Anthropologists point to the fire as a social technology, not just a physical one. It lengthened the day, giving people the chance to reflect, tell stories, and pass on memories. A grandfather might point with a glowing stick and explain how to find the best berries, while a child wide-eyed commits it to memory. Now scientists continue to debate whether fire use was universal across early human groups, or if some communities lagged behind. What is clear, however, is that those who mastered it lived longer, safer lives. Fire drove away predators, hardened wooden spear tips, and sterilized water. And in the most delicious twist, it unlocked nutrition hidden inside food. Cooked meat softened roots, and roasted nuts delivered more calories with less chewing. It may sound like a minor comfort, but less chewing meant less energy wasted and more fuel for the brain. And that brain was hungry. Our ancestors' grey matter devoured about 20% of daily energy intake, a steep price for survival, but one that fire helped pay. Quirky as it may sound, some archaeologists even speculate that fire sparked not only intelligence but humour. Imagine sitting in the glow, experimenting with shadows on the wall, making silly animal shapes with your hands. Someone snorts, another giggles, and suddenly laughter ripples through the group. These moments are more than entertainment. They cement bonds, encourage trust, and carve the grooves of empathy deeper into human hearts. A famous site in South Africa, called Wonderwerk Cave, holds ash deposits nearly 1 million years old. That's right, 1 million. Layers of burnt bone and charcoal hint that Homo erectus, not just Homo sapiens, already knew how to keep fire alive. If you picture them not as brutish cavemen, But as innovators seated by carefully tended flames, the stereotype crumbles like old charcoal. They weren't merely surviving, they were shaping culture. And when you look closer, you see the flickering brilliance firelight makes eyes glisten, it draws faces together, and it magnifies gestures. In a sense, it was the world's first spotlight, turning a storyteller into a performer. Perhaps a hunter reenacted the day's chase, gesturing wildly, exaggerating the size of the beast, while the children squealed in delight. Perhaps someone mimicked the roar of a lion, badly causing the group to collapse in laughter. The very act of storytelling so central to our lives today might have been born there in that ring of smoke and sparks. Even now, think of the way you feel when you stare into a campfire. The hypnotic rhythm of flames, the unpredictable pop of sparks, it settles you, slows your breathing, and makes your thoughts wander in soft spirals. Our ancestors must have felt it too, and perhaps the calm was as important as the fire itself. A calm mind, after all, is fertile soil for cleverness. And here's a cheeky image. Imagine someone 500,000 years ago dropping their food straight into the fire, pulling it out charred and smoking and saying, not bad. That culinary accident may have paved the way for cuisine as we know it. Burnt mammoth steak. Well, it beats raw. The truth is, fire transformed human evenings from fearful silence to luminous opportunity. It allowed ideas to grow wings, laughter to echo, and wisdom to travel from one generation to the next. The crackle of flames became the soundtrack of evolution and the shadows on the wall. They were the first flickers of imagination, proof that prehistoric humans were thinking far more deeply than we usually give them credit for. Stone tools often appear in museums as little grey chunks of flint under glass, looking almost boring until you really pay attention. To the untrained eye, they may seem like nothing more than broken rocks, but in truth, they're the fingerprints of genius. Each carefully chipped edge, each deliberate strike speaks of someone standing in a forest or on a grassy plain thousands of years ago, puzzling over how best to crack one stone against another, to make a blade sharp enough to cut through hide meat or wood. These were not random accidents. They were solutions. And if you've ever tried to open a package without scissors and resorted to using your teeth, you know that tools are not trivial. They're the difference between frustration and victory. What makes early stone tools remarkable is not just their sharpness, but their planning. The famous Acheulean hand axe, shaped like a teardrop, wasn't whipped up in 5 seconds. It required a mental blueprint. Whoever made it had to picture the finished tool in their mind, then carefully chip away at a rock to reach that shape. That kind of foresight, the ability to see something that doesn't yet exist, is a hallmark of intelligence. Today, we might call it design thinking. Back then, it was survival. Mainstream archaeologists will tell you that these axes date back at least 1.7 million years. Imagine holding one, it fits neatly in your palm, symmetrical and elegant, capable of chopping wood or butchering an animal. And here's the quirky bit. Some hand axes discovered are simply too large or too finely made to be practical. Scientists continue to debate whether those oversized beauties were status symbols, courtship gifts, or just prehistoric flexes. Picture someone showing off their gigantic, impractical stone axe like a luxury car. Look what I can make. Bet you can't. Its possible craftsmanship was already linked to prestige. When you stop to consider the time and energy that went into shaping a single stone tool, you realize it was more than just survival gear. It was evidence of teaching. A young apprentice probably watched an elder mimicking their movements and received corrections along the way. In this, you can almost hear the echoes of mentorship, patience, and learning. And really, who among us hasn't messed up a DIY project while our more experienced friend looks on shaking their head? Some things never change. The tools also reveal a global mind. Similar designs appear across vast distances, suggesting that ideas spread through migration or contact. That means early humans weren't just inventing alone. They were sharing innovations, passing along knowledge like precious seeds. Today, we'd call it networking, but back then, it was a lifeline. A chipped stone found in Africa might mirror one from Europe, hinting at a web of human connection stretching further than we usually imagine. And here's where things get really interesting. Not every tool was stone. Some were made of wood or bone, which rarely survived the millennia. That means what we found is just the tip of the iceberg. Scientists continue to debate whether prehistoric people were far more technologically advanced than the archaeological record suggests. Imagine if most of what we've created today vanished, except for our kitchen knives. Future researchers might think that was the peak of our abilities. In the same way, stone tools may unfairly undersell prehistoric ingenuity. Still, the surviving pieces are astonishing. Take obsidian volcanic glass, sharper than a surgeon's scalpel. Prehistoric people learned not only to shape it, but to transport it across long distances, trading it like treasure. In Turkey, obsidian artifacts have been found far from volcanic sources, meaning someone valued it enough to carry it miles through rough terrain. That's not just smart, that's business. Humor me for a second. Imagine a prehistoric stand-up comedian joking. You know you're in love when she hands you her best hand axe. It sounds silly, but gifting tools may have been one of the earliest ways to show affection or alliance. After all, nothing says commitment like sharing your sharpest flint. But perhaps the most striking thing is this: every flake chipped off a stone was an act of imagination. The maker wasn't just reacting to a problem, they were inventing futures. That's a form of intelligence we can still admire. While today we admire skyscrapers or smartphones, those early flints deserve applause. They whisper that our ancestors were more than survivors. They were creators, thinkers, and yes, maybe even artists of stone. So next time you see one of those dull-looking rocks in a glass case, try to picture the spark in someone's eyes as they struck that stone, shaping a future that would last millions of years. You might find yourself smiling, realizing that prehistoric humans weren't just smarter than we think they were, in some ways already a little like us. When most people imagine prehistoric life, they picture shaggy-haired humans huddled in damp caves, waiting out storms while bats flitted overhead. But here's the truth. Our ancestors were far more inventive about shelter than that tired old stereotype. Yes, caves provided refuge, but evidence suggests humans built homes that could rival the cleverness of a modern camper's tent. They didn't just hide in nature, they reshaped it. Archaeological digs across Europe and Asia revealed traces of huts built from wood mammoth bones and hides stretched over frameworks. At sites like Mezhyrich in Ukraine, massive rings of mammoth bones, some dating back 15,000 years, show that humans planned and constructed durable homes. Imagine the effort collecting enormous bones, arranging them in circular patterns, and then layering them with hides for insulation. It was less a cave, more a prehistoric mansion. The quirky part: some of these shelters may have included decorative touches, shells, carvings, or pigments, like an ancient version of home decor. Even then, people wanted their living space to reflect personality. Now scientists continue to debate how widespread permanent structures were, but the evidence points toward a surprisingly organized sense of community life. Building such shelters required foresight, teamwork, and maybe even leadership. Someone had to say, you fetch the wood, you stretch the hide, and you try not to drop that mammoth femur on your foot. That's coordination on a scale we don't often credit to prehistoric humans. These shelters weren't just practical, they were social hubs. Inside fire pits glowed at the center, Smoke filtered through small gaps, and families likely shared meals, stories, and songs. In this sense, the hut became more than protection. It was a symbol of belonging. Anthropologists suggest that creating home marked a cognitive leap. It showed humans could take control over their environment, making it not only survivable, but comfortable. There's something beautifully human about that. Think of the way we decorate dorm rooms or add throw pillows to couches. That instinct for coziness stretches all the way back. One excavation in Siberia even uncovered a mammoth bone structure with multiple rooms. Yes, prehistoric people may have invented open-plan living long before architects caught on. And here's a fun thought. Perhaps not every shelter was equally sturdy. Just as modern construction has its shoddy shortcuts, there must have been huts that collapsed embarrassingly in the middle of the night. Maybe a group of children laughed as a poorly tied hide flapped loose in the wind. Maybe someone groaned, "Next time I'm building it myself." These mishaps are relatable across time, and they reveal the trial and error nature of innovation. Stone circles and post holes also reveal the footprints of wooden structures long since decayed. Some sites even suggest that shelters were rebuilt seasonally adapted for hunting routes or climate shifts. That adaptability shows a flexibility of thought that echoes modern problem solving. Instead of being at the mercy of whether humans engineered comfort zones. What's fascinating is how this tied into survival. A well-built shelter conserved energy, less heat lost, meant fewer calories burned just to stay alive. And conserving energy in turn supported bigger brains. So in a subtle way, the act of home building fed intelligence, and intelligence improved home building a feedback loop of innovation. Scholars often argue whether these huts represent true architecture. But let's be honest, if you've ever tried to pitch a tent without instructions, you'll know that what they did was no small feat. Prehistoric builders had no manuals, no YouTube tutorials, only observation, experimentation, and memory. That they succeeded so often proves a high level of cognitive skill. And of course, there's the symbolic side. Some shelters were clearly more than practical. They were places for ritual or gathering marked by patterns of bones or artifacts. To walk inside, one might have felt like stepping into a sacred space, echoing with the voices of those who came before. Home wasn't just walls and roofs, it was identity. So next time someone dismisses our ancestors as cave dwellers, remember this: they built homes from the bones of giants, layered with hide, warmed by fire, and decorated with care. Their shelters were not just survival tools, but cultural statements, proof that prehistoric humans sought comfort, meaning, and beauty in their everyday lives. Cooking is one of those things we take for granted: pots bubbling on stoves, the smell of bread in an oven, the sizzle of onions in a pan. But when you trace that simple act of cooking back in time, it becomes clear the leap from raw to roasted was a revolution. Prehistoric humans didn't just discover fire. They figured out how to use it to transform food, and in doing so, they may have reshaped their own brains. Think of raw roots or raw meat, tough, chewy, hard to digest. Now imagine tossing them onto hot embers and letting heat do the work. Suddenly, that stubborn root becomes soft, sweet, and far easier to swallow. That fibrous hunk of meat, tender, smoky, and packed with calories ready for absorption. Anthropologists argue that cooking unlocked more nutrition than any other innovation in human history. Richard Wrangham, a Harvard primatologist, even proposed the cooking hypothesis, suggesting that roasted meals gave early humans the caloric surplus needed to fuel bigger brains. After all, a brain is an expensive organ. It gulps down about a fifth of your daily energy. Without cooking, keeping that powerhouse running might have been impossible. But here's the quirky side. Cooking didn't only change the body, it changed society. Once you've got a meal on the fire, you need time for it to cook. That means waiting, which means gathering, which means talking. In that pause, language could bloom, stories could unfold, and laughter could ripple across the circle. Food became an excuse for connection. In a way, the first dinner parties were happening tens of thousands of years ago, minus the wine glasses and awkward small talk. Now scientists continue to debate exactly when cooking began. Charred bones and burned plant remains found in ancient hearths hint at cooking over 500,000 years ago, perhaps even earlier. Some argue Homo erectus may have been the first cook. Picture that a group crouched around a fire sniffing curiously as the air filled with the aroma of roasted tubers. Maybe the first chef was just someone who accidentally dropped meat into flames and discovered it tasted better that way. Culinary genius or happy accident? Hard to say, but the outcome was world-changing. Cooking also opened doors to creativity. It wasn't long before people realized you could combine ingredients, mash berries into fat-wrapped meat in leaves or sprinkle salt from dried seabeds. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthals, often painted as less intelligent cousins, were mixing wild herbs into their meals. Imagine that a pinch of seasoning, a touch of variety. They weren't just eating to survive, they were making cuisine. And humor alert. Imagine being the unlucky taste tester when someone first tried tossing random plants into the pot. Here, try this stew. Why is it glowing? Green? Trial and error was part of the process, and sadly, some experiments probably ended badly. But those who succeeded laid the foundations for human gastronomy. Cooking also changed gender roles and daily routines. Some argue that it encouraged cooperation, one person tending the fire, another preparing food, children learning to share portions. Meals became structured events that required patience and trust. And trust, as psychologists today remind us, is one of the building blocks of complex society. Think too about the practical implications. Cooked food lasted longer, meaning less waste and more security in lean times. That's an early form of food preservation, another stroke of brilliance we often overlook. A mammoth steak roasted today might still be edible tomorrow, giving people a cushion against hunger. Even today, food brings us together. Family dinners, holiday feasts, street markets all echo that ancient moment when someone poked a stick into the fire and pulled out something delicious. Cooking wasn't just survival, it was transformation. It gave humans stronger bodies, sharper minds, and deeper connections. So the next time you enjoy a hot meal, think of the first prehistoric chef who discovered that fire wasn't only a tool for protection, but also the secret ingredient for intelligence. In every steaming bowl of soup or sizzling pan of food, there's a whisper from the deep past, proof that prehistoric humans were already thinking smarter than we give them credit for. If there's one thing Hollywood tends to get hilariously wrong, it's prehistoric hunting. Movies often show a single burly caveman charging at a mammoth with a spear, yelling dramatically as if that ever would have worked. In reality, hunting massive animals wasn't a solo stunt. It was a symphony of teamwork. Prehistoric humans were clever strategists, not reckless daredevils. Imagine facing a woolly mammoth, a towering creature weighing up to 6 tons, or a bison with horns sharp enough to send you flying. One-on-one, a human wouldn't last 3 seconds, maybe less. But in groups with coordination and planning, suddenly the odds improved. Archaeologists have found evidence of ancient game drives, where entire herds were funneled into ravines or toward cliffs. Sites like the Buffalo Jump in North America and stone-built funnel traps in Europe reveal that early humans set up landscapes as traps. That required foresight, cooperation, and clear communication. Picture it, hunters spread out across a plain, waving branches, shouting and working together to steer terrified animals into a deadly path. Spears fly, stones are thrown, and eventually the beast is overwhelmed. It wasn't just bravery, it was choreography. And if you've ever tried to organize a group project without half the people flaking out, you'll know just how impressive that coordination was. One quirky discovery comes from Boxgrove in England, where archaeologists uncovered butchered horse bones nearly 500,000 years old. Marks on the bones show that multiple people worked together, slicing and sharing in what might have been one of the earliest community barbecues. It's a reminder that hunting wasn't just about survival, it was also about bonding, feasting, and maybe even celebration. Now scientists continue to debate the balance between hunting and scavenging. Did our ancestors always bring down fresh kills? Or did they sometimes steal leftovers from lions and hyenas? The truth is probably both. But when they did hunt, it was smart hunting, planned, coordinated, and efficient. And think about the ripple effects. Hunting in teams demanded trust. One person distracted another, aimed another, blocked an escape route. Betray that trust, and the whole hunt collapsed. In a way, hunting trained humans for social cooperation skills that would later shape villages' trade, and eventually civilizations. Without teamwork in the hunt, teamwork in society might never have blossomed. It's also worth noting that prehistoric weapons themselves show intelligence. Wooden spears from Schöningen, Germany, date back over 300,000 years and were balanced perfectly for throwing. These weren't crude sticks, they were aerodynamic tools requiring skill to make, and even more skill to use. Archaeologists testing replicas found they worked astonishingly well, flying with the accuracy of a modern javelin. Imagine the pride of the maker who carved it just right, or the laughter when someone's badly shaped spear wobbled and dropped like a sad twig. Trial and error must have been part of the process, and humor was probably close behind. And here's the softer side of the hunt, the sharing. Once a beast was downed, meat was divided, marrow bones cracked open, fat roasted. In those meals, everyone was nourished. Children learned by watching, elders taught by example, and alliances were sealed with roasted meat. Food was power, but it was also glue binding groups together through generosity and memory. It's fun to imagine prehistoric hunters boasting about their victories around the fire. Maybe someone exaggerated the size of the bison they helped take down while others rolled their eyes. Some things never change. Fishermen still exaggerate the size of their catch. The difference is, back then the stakes were survival, not just bragging rights. So the next time you hear someone dismiss early humans as simple-minded, remember the sight of hunters spreading across a plain, signaling with gestures, funneling a herd toward a cliff, and working with a unity that even modern sports teams would envy. They weren't reckless brutes. They were tacticians, organizers, and masters of cooperation, proving once again that they were far smarter than we often give them credit for. Step into a cave deep in the hills of France or Spain, and you'll find something that takes your breath away. On the walls, painted in ochre black and red, are horses galloping, bison charging, and handprints left like signatures across time. These aren't idle doodles. They're masterpieces created by people who lived more than 20,000 years ago. And they force us to ask if these so-called primitive humans could produce such sophisticated art. How primitive were they really? The Lascaux caves in France are perhaps the most famous example, vast chambers filled with nearly 600 images of animals. Horses with muscular curves, bulls drawn in bold outlines, deer leaping with grace. Some figures even overlap, giving a sense of movement. This wasn't just art for art's sake. It was storytelling, teaching, maybe even ritual. Imagine an elder leading children into the cave, pointing at a painted bison and explaining the best way to track it. The walls became textbooks, classrooms in stone. Now scientists continue to debate the true purpose of these paintings. Were they spiritual, meant to summon good fortune in the hunt? Were they mnemonic devices, reminders of seasonal migrations? Or were they simply self-expression, the joy of creation? Whatever the motive, one thing is certain: it took imagination, planning, and skill to make them. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cave paintings were deliberately placed where flickering torchlight would make the images seem alive. Picture it: shadows dancing, animals moving as flames waved. That's practically cinema thousands of years before projectors. So yes, prehistoric humans might have been the first filmmakers. I wouldn't be surprised if kids begged their parents, "Can we go see the bison show again tonight?" The very act of creating art suggests abstract thought. These people weren't just reacting to immediate needs like food and shelter. They were reaching beyond survival into the realm of ideas. To mix pigments, they had to experiment with minerals, charcoal, and binders like animal fat or saliva. That's chemistry in its earliest form. To create perspective, they had to study animal shapes, memorize movement, and replicate it with surprising accuracy. And the humor of it. Somewhere along the line, someone must have tried painting their friend with ochre, turning them into the prehistoric equivalent of a clown. Children probably smeared their hands on the wall for fun, long before archaeologists labeled it ritual. Creativity often comes with playfulness, and it's lovely to imagine laughter echoing in those caves as much as solemn silence. In Indonesia, cave art goes back even further, over 40,000 years. Hand stencils made by spitting pigment around a palm pressed to rock show that humans across continents shared the impulse to leave a mark. It's as if they were saying, "I was here. Remember me." That desire, deeply human, is something we still carry. From selfies on our phones to graffiti on a city wall, the instinct is the same. What's more, some symbols repeat across caves separated by thousands of miles. Zigzags, dots, grids, they may have been a kind of proto-writing visual codes whose meaning is now lost. If that's true, then we're staring at the earliest chapters of literature scrawled in mineral paint under flickering firelight. To dismiss this as mere decoration is to underestimate the minds behind it. These were not brute survivors. They were artists, teachers, maybe even philosophers shaping worlds with pigments and imagination. They stood in darkness, torch in hand, and conjured visions of life larger than themselves. So the next time someone calls early humans primitive, remember the bison leaping in ochre, the horses galloping in shadow, the human hands pressed against stone like echoes of a greeting across 20,000 years. Their art whispers that intelligence is not measured only by gadgets or machines, but by the ability to dream, and prehistoric humans dreamed in color. Now imagine the scene not with paint, but with sound. Deep in a cave or under the open sky, someone lifts a hollow bone to their lips, blows gently, and out comes a soft, eerie note that drifts into the night. That's right. Music wasn't invented with violins or pianos. It began with flutes carved from bird bones and mammoth ivory tens of thousands of years ago. Archaeologists in Germany uncovered one such flute in the Hohlefels cave, dating back around 40,000 years. The fact that it still produces notes today is mind-blowing. It tells us that prehistoric humans weren't just banging rocks together. They were crafting instruments to stir the heart. Think about what it means to hollow out a fragile bone, cut holes with precision, and then test it until sound emerges. That's delicate work requiring patience, dexterity, and experimentation. If you've ever tried to learn an instrument and squeaked your way through Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, you'll appreciate how clever these first musicians were. They weren't simply making noise. They were shaping tones and rhythms, exploring the magic of sound. And it wasn't just flutes. Evidence suggests they used drums made from stretched animal hides, rattles from seeds, or stones inside gourds and sticks for rhythm. Music is one of those things that doesn't leave behind clear fossils, but hints of it echo in artifacts and in our bones. After all, rhythm is universal. Our heartbeat itself is a drum. It's not hard to imagine our ancestors tapping along, turning their environment into an orchestra. Now, scientists continue to debate the role of music in prehistoric life. Was it for ritual to connect with the divine? Was it for teaching helping children remember hunting routes through song? Or was it simply for joy, for dancing, laughing, and feeling alive together? Some anthropologists argue that music was an evolutionary advantage, strengthening group bonds. When voices lifted together in harmony, trust grew stronger. A group that sings together stays together. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some researchers think that lullabies might be the oldest songs of all. Picture a mother humming softly to soothe her baby while sparks from the fire glow around them. That gentle sound, repeated across countless generations, may have helped keep infants calm, ensuring survival. In a sense, the first bedtime stories weren't told in words, but sung in melodies. You could say bedtime channels like this one are simply carrying on a tradition that began over 40,000 years ago. And if you want a touch of humor, imagine the first prehistoric jam session. One person bangs two stones together, another claps, someone else blows a flute, and suddenly a rhythm takes shape. Maybe a young hunter starts dancing awkwardly, and the group erupts in laughter. You can practically see the sparks of culture being born in those moments of fun. Even trial and error must have been entertaining. No thugs stop hitting the drum while I'm trying to solo. Some things never change. Music also helped bridge distances. Across valleys, a drum beat or a shouted chant could signal gatherings or hunts. The same way church bells once called medieval villages together rhythm may have been an ancient loudspeaker system. More than that, it gave meaning to rituals, birth, death, coming of age, all marked by sound. What's striking is how music connects to memory. Try remembering a list of words without melody, then try singing them. You'll recall far more with the tune. Prehistoric people likely knew this intuitively. Songs could encode survival information, which plants were safe when to travel, how to hunt. In this way, music was more than art. It was a survival tool disguised as beauty. So when you hum in the shower or tap your foot to a beat, you're joining an unbroken chain, stretching back to those first bone flutes and hide drums. Prehistoric humans weren't only hunters or painters. They were composers of a soundtrack that carried hope, unity, and joy. They remind us that intelligence doesn't only measure in tools or fire, but in the ability to create something that moves the soul. Close your eyes for a moment and picture two early humans crouched by the fire lips, moving hands, gesturing, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm that feels oddly familiar. They are not grunting like beasts. They are speaking, or at least they are on the road to speaking. This is one of the greatest mysteries of prehistory. When and how did language, our defining trait, truly emerge? Now, scientists continue to debate exactly when structured speech appeared. Some say Homo sapiens alone had the full package of language, while others argue Neanderthals and even earlier ancestors were already chattering away. What we do know is that language leaves no fossil, only hints. The shape of the hyoid bone, the structure of the vocal tract, and genetic markers like FOXP2 suggest that our ancestors had the equipment for speech far earlier than we once thought. That means they weren't just pointing and grunting. They might have been forming words, even sentences. Think about what that implies. With language, you don't need to mime how to make a spear. You can explain it step by step. You don't need to drag someone to a berry bush. You can tell them where it is. And here's the quirky part. With words, you can also exaggerate. That mammoth was this big, you say, holding your arms wide while your friend rolls their eyes. Yes, bragging may be as old as speech itself. Language was a revolution of thought. Suddenly humans could share not just facts, but dreams, warnings, jokes, and plans. It allowed ideas to outlive individuals carried in memory and retelling. Imagine an elder sitting by the fire telling the story of a hunt from decades earlier, and young listeners learning strategies without having to make the same mistakes. That's generational knowledge passed like an heirloom. And humor, oh humor, must have been born here. Jokes rely on timing, surprise, and shared understanding. Even a silly pun or playful nickname is proof of linguistic sophistication. I like to imagine prehistoric pranksters inventing new words to tease their friends, laughter rippling through the night as someone realized they'd been called big nose in the new tongue. Language also reshaped social bonds. Once you can talk about feelings, promises, and rules, communities grow more complex. Gossip, believe it or not, may have been one of the earliest functions of language. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar argues that gossip replaced grooming in primates. It allowed humans to bond in larger groups, managing relationships not by picking lice, but by trading stories. Honestly, that might explain why celebrity news sites still exist. We're wired for gossip. Here's another fascinating thread. Some researchers propose that singing came before speaking. Melodic chants may have smoothed the way for structured words. This theory suggests that our ancestors didn't just leap into conversation, they sang their way there. Picture a group humming instructions, chanting together during a hunt, or crooning to babies in something halfway between lullaby and language. And of course, language is tied to imagination. To describe something not in front of you, to talk about tomorrow or a dream or an idea requires abstract thought. That's intelligence in action. It shows that prehistoric people weren't just living in the moment. They were projecting forward, planning futures, even inventing myths. The funny side, miscommunication must have been just as common then as it is now. Someone says go left, another hears go right, and suddenly the bison stampede is headed straight toward them. Or maybe one hunter mutters instructions under his breath, and the others glare saying, "Speak up, Thag." It's strangely comforting to know that confusion is timeless. So while we'll never hear the exact sound of prehistoric voices, the evidence suggests they were far more eloquent than we give them credit for. In their conversations, gossip, chants, and jokes, we glimpse the first sparks of culture. The gift of language didn't just make them smarter, it made them human. Picture a small clearing in the forest, smoke rising gently from a fire, and beside it, a figure crouched over a bundle of leaves. This isn't a meal, it's medicine. Long before hospitals, pharmacies, and white lab coats, prehistoric humans were experimenting with plants' roots and even surgery to keep each other alive. It might surprise you, but the evidence suggests they were far more medically savvy than we assume. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, archaeologists uncovered the skeleton of a Neanderthal who had survived severe injuries, including a crushed skull and withered arm. The fact that he lived years after those injuries suggests others cared for him, feeding, protecting, and perhaps even treating him. This isn't just survival instinct. It's compassion woven with practical knowledge. Someone must have known which herbs soothed pain, which roots eased infection, and which teas calmed the body. Here's the quirky part. Pollen traces found around Neanderthal graves hint at the use of medicinal flowers like yarrow and chamomile. Imagine that prehistoric herbal tea. They may not have called it organic wellness, but they knew nature's pharmacy well enough to harness it. If you've ever sipped chamomile before bed, you're drinking the same soothing remedy our ancestors likely discovered tens of thousands of years ago. Now scientists continue to debate how much of this was intentional medicine versus accidental discovery. Did someone chew willow bark specifically for pain relief? It contains the same active ingredient as aspirin. Or did they just like the taste and notice the effect later? Either way, knowledge spread. Observation, trial, and memory were powerful tools. And it wasn't just plants. Evidence shows that early humans may have performed rudimentary surgery. Skulls from as far back as 7,000 years ago show signs of trepanation, a hole cut into the skull, often with bone regrowth afterward, meaning the patient survived. It sounds terrifying to us, but perhaps it relieved pressure from head injuries, or was part of ritual healing. Imagine lying still while someone carved a neat circle in your skull with a flint blade, and somehow living to tell the tale. That's not primitive, that's bold innovation. Dental archaeology also reveals fascinating tidbits. Stone Age teeth sometimes show tiny scratches that suggest people used toothpicks made of wood or bone. Toothpicks proof that even then nobody liked food stuck between their molars. And at a site in Italy, signs of early dentistry appear in cavities scraped clean and packed with bitumen, a sticky tar-like substance. It's basically a Stone Age filling. Painful, probably. Effective. Surprisingly so. And let's not forget the placebo effect. Healing often involves belief, and prehistoric humans seem to have grasped this. Charms, rituals, and chants may not have cured illness in the biological sense, but they calmed patients, reduced stress, and gave hope. Anyone who's ever felt better after a parent kissed a scraped knee knows the power of comfort in healing. Our ancestors clearly understood that too. Here's a humorous angle: some unlucky person had to be the first test subject. Imagine someone insisting, chew this strange root, it'll help your stomach. The friend grimaces, swallows and mutters, or it'll kill me. Trial and error must have been nerve-wracking. But through those risks, they built a library of knowledge written not in books, but in experience. And the generosity of care is just as striking as the science. Keeping an injured or sick member alive requires group effort. It means carrying them when they can't walk, sharing food when they can't hunt, and protecting them when they're vulnerable. That compassion suggests emotional intelligence running as deep as practical skill. So when you think of prehistoric humans, don't just imagine hunters with spears. Imagine healers with bundles of herbs, caretakers tending the wounded, and wise elders teaching which leaves soothe and which berries kill. They weren't stumbling blindly through pain, they were practicing the beginnings of medicine, proving once again that their intelligence was not just sharp, but profoundly humane. Now let's shift the scene from fireside medicine to a different kind of brilliance trading. Not only objects, but ideas. Picture groups of humans separated by mountains or rivers, meeting in clearings or along ancient paths. They don't all speak the same language, but they recognize obsidian for its sharp edges, shells for their beauty, or ochre for its vivid color. So they swap stone for hide pigment, for meat information, for trust. This was more than barter. It was the birth of networks, and it required memory planning and a kind of mental accounting that we often underestimate. Archaeological finds prove that prehistoric trade routes stretched surprisingly far. Obsidian from volcanic regions in Turkey shows up hundreds of miles away in places where no volcano exists. Marine shells appear deep inland, carried from the coast as treasured ornaments. These journeys weren't casual strolls. They were intentional exchanges, proving that people valued not just survival basics, but prestige, beauty, and novelty. It's hard not to smile, imagining a hunter arriving home with a glittering shell, children, wide-eyed elders murmuring approval, and someone muttering, "Great, now everyone will want one." Here's the quirky part. This wasn't just about objects. Trade demanded trust and memory. If one group promised to deliver hides in exchange for flint, both sides needed to remember and honor that agreement. Forgetfulness or dishonesty could lead to conflict. In that sense, early trade was the first test of reliability, reputation, and maybe even diplomacy. You can almost hear a prehistoric negotiator saying, "No, last time you promised 2 baskets of berries, not 1. Ancient receipts might not have been written, but they were certainly remembered. Now scientists continue to debate whether prehistoric trade was primarily practical, ensuring survival in harsh climates, or symbolic, strengthening social bonds. The truth is likely both. A shiny seashell worn as a necklace wasn't just jewelry. It was a visible reminder of connection, proof that someone had traveled, traded, and brought back more than survival goods. That shell was a story. The act of exchange also demanded forward thinking. If you're carrying obsidian across rough terrain, you have to plan the trip, manage supplies, and calculate the risk of theft or loss. That's advanced cognition logistics in its earliest form. We praise modern supply chains as marvels of human ingenuity, but their roots lie in prehistoric minds who carried goods across valleys and deserts. And don't forget the joy of novelty. Just like today, we get excited about the latest smartphone. Prehistoric people must have felt a thrill seeing a new tool bead or pigment from far away. Curiosity, after all, is timeless. Imagine someone turning over a gleaming chunk of obsidian in the firelight, marveling at how it caught the glow and whispering, "We've never seen anything like this." That wonder fueled trade as much as utility. Humorously, I can't help but think of the first bad trades. Maybe someone swapped a prime spearhead for a lump of rock that turned out to be useless. The grumbling back at camp would have been priceless. You traded what for this? Buyer's remorse, it seems, could be as old as trade itself. But overall, these exchanges laid the groundwork for something profound. Trade wasn't just about moving goods. It was about moving minds. It connected communities, wove distant groups into networks, and encouraged cooperation rather than constant conflict. In shellstones and pigments, we glimpse the beginnings of globalization, not in ships and airplanes, but in footsteps and handshakes. So the next time someone insists that prehistoric people were isolated and simple, remember the obsidian carried for miles, the shells treasured inland, and the quiet agreements sealed without paper or pen. They weren't just surviving. They were building bridges across landscapes, proving that intelligence shines not only in invention, but in connection. Look up at the night sky, brilliant stars scattered across the darkness, the moon casting silver light. For us, it's awe-inspiring, but for prehistoric humans, it was also a guide, a calendar, and maybe even a companion. Long before telescopes, they watched the heavens closely, and their survival often depended on it. Evidence suggests that these early stargazers were not only dreamers, but also scientists of the night. At sites like Nabta Playa in Egypt, stone circles dating back nearly 7,000 years line up with solstices hinting at astronomical knowledge far older than Stonehenge. In Lascaux Cave, some of the painted dots above the bulls have been interpreted as representations of the Pleiades star cluster. That means humans weren't just painting animals, they were mapping the sky. Imagine standing in a cave torchlight, flickering, pointing at dots on the wall and saying, "That's the same cluster you'll see when the seasons change." That's astronomy embedded in art, Now scientists continue to debate just how advanced prehistoric astronomy was. Did they track only broad seasonal patterns? Or did they notice finer details like eclipses? The evidence isn't conclusive, but even the most conservative view acknowledges that stars and cycles mattered deeply. Farmers needed to know when to plant hunters when herds migrated, and travelers which way to walk. The night sky was a cosmic compass. Here's the quirky bit: some ancient bones, like the famous Ishango bone from Central Africa, are carved with notches that some scholars interpret as lunar calendars. Others argue they're just tallies of something else entirely, like trade counts or hunting records. Still, it's fascinating to imagine someone marking time by the waxing and waning of the moon. Picture an ancestor scratching lines into bone by firelight, muttering, 3 more nights until the hunt. That's not superstition. That's math, written in starlight. What's more, constellations themselves may have been prehistoric mnemonics, visual stories stitched into the sky. The hunter Orion, the bear of Ursa Major, the twins of Gemini. These patterns gave people a way to remember complex information. Instead of charts, they used stories, a method still powerful today. Try remembering a string of random numbers and you'll struggle. Turn it into a narrative and it sticks. Prehistoric people knew this instinctively, teaching survival through cosmic storytelling. Humor slips in when you think about it. The first arguments about star names must have been lively. That's clearly a mammoth. No, it's a duck. You're both wrong. It's a giant bear chasing us across the heavens. Disagreements about constellations are older than written language. And if you've ever argued with a friend about whether a cloud looks like a rabbit or a dragon, you know the tradition continues. Watching the skies also stirred wonder and spirituality. The endless dome of stars suggested vastness, mystery, and maybe gods. A shooting star might have been a sign, a comet, a warning. It wasn't just science. It was meaning-making proof that intelligence looks up as much as it looks down. Navigation, too, was likely tied to the stars. Early seafarers crossing to islands in Indonesia or the Mediterranean may have relied on celestial cues long before compasses existed. That courage to step into a dark horizon guided only by flickering points of light speaks of intellect mixed with daring. It wasn't blind wandering. It was informed risk-taking, the mark of a sharp mind. And perhaps the most touching part, prehistoric people probably used stars for comfort. In a world of danger and uncertainty, the sky was reliable, returning each night in familiar patterns. Imagine a child asking their parent about a bright star and the parent weaving a story to calm them. In that moment, astronomy became not just survival, but bedtime reassurance. So next time you trace a constellation, remember that you're sharing in an ancient practice. Long before smartphones told us the weather, the stars told our ancestors when to move, when to plant, and which way to walk. Their intelligence was written not in books, but in the heavens above. Walk with me now into the stillness of a prehistoric burial site. The air is heavy, the earth freshly disturbed, and at the center lies not just a body, but a story. Burial, after all, is not a necessity for survival. It's a choice, a gesture of meaning. When our ancestors began to bury their dead, it was more than practical disposal. It was a statement: this life mattered. And in that act we glimpse a profound intelligence, one that thought not only of today, but of memory, grief, and perhaps eternity. Archaeologists at Shanidar Cave in Iraq uncovered Neanderthal graves sprinkled with pollen, suggesting flowers were placed beside the dead. It's debated whether the flowers blew in naturally or were deliberately chosen, but the very possibility forces us to rethink Neanderthals. If they arranged blooms around their dead, They weren't cold brutes. They were mourners. Imagine bending low in a dark cave, laying wildflowers on a loved one's chest. That simple act whispers volumes about empathy, ritual, and love. Now scientists continue to debate whether burials always carried symbolic meaning, or were sometimes practical protection from scavengers or a way to avoid disease. But even the simplest grave requires planning. A pit must be dug, a body arranged, objects placed with care. That suggests thought beyond instinct. And here's the quirky part: some burials contain surprising items. At Sungir in Russia, 2 children were laid to rest over 30,000 years ago, adorned with thousands of ivory beads painstakingly carved and sewn onto clothing. That's hours upon hours of labor devoted to children who would never hunt or trade again. If that isn't symbolic thinking, what is? In those beads, we see the beginnings of what later became crowns, jewels, and heirlooms, symbols of status and love. Burials also hint at belief in something more. If you bury someone with tools, beads, or food, you're preparing them for a journey. That means you imagine a world beyond this one. And whether or not they were right, the fact that they imagined it shows staggering creativity. Spirituality, ritual, and myth may have roots right here in the quiet soil over ancient graves. Of course, funerals likely carried the same mix of solemnity and awkwardness they do today. Picture a group gathered, some quietly mourning, others not quite sure what to say. One person starts chanting, another adds a rhythm, and suddenly a ritual is born. That's how traditions begin: spontaneous gestures repeated until they carry weight. Perhaps even humor found its place, someone remembering a funny moment, with the deceased sparking a laugh that lightened grief. Mourning and humor hand in hand, as human then as now. And burials gave communities a way to remember. Marked sites became landmarks, places where people returned, where stories were retold. This is where she rests, the one who saved us from the river flood. Memory anchored itself in earth, giving humans continuity across generations. In that sense, graves were not just endings, but beginnings of culture. Even more striking are cases of care before death. Skeletons show healed injuries and illnesses that must have required long-term support. These people weren't abandoned. They were carried, fed, and protected until the end. And when they died, they were laid down with care. That arc of compassion, life to death to memory, paints a picture of humans thinking deeply, feeling profoundly, and acting with purpose. So when you stand in a museum and see ancient bones arranged in glass, remember that they were once part of ceremonies filled with tears, songs, flowers, and maybe laughter. Burials are not just about death. They're about meaning, imagination, and love. They remind us that prehistoric humans were not mindless survivors, but thoughtful beings who honored life in its final chapter. Picture the icy winds of a glacial plain sweeping over a small band of humans. Their breath fogs the air, but instead of shivering bare-skinned, they are wrapped in carefully stitched hides and furs. Clothing wasn't just a fashion statement, it was survival tech. And the more archaeologists study the scraps of bone needles, beads, and preserved fibers, the clearer it becomes. Prehistoric humans were clever tailors, weaving intelligence into every stitch. At sites like Kostenki in Russia, delicate bone needles with drilled eyes have been uncovered, some dating back over 30,000 years. That tiny hole tells us everything it means. Thread existed made from sinew gut or plant fibers, and it means people were sewing garments together, not just draping hides across their shoulders. A needle isn't an obvious invention. It requires imagination, precision, and probably quite a few failed attempts. If you've ever jabbed your finger trying to sew a button, you'll appreciate the brilliance of someone inventing the tool in the first place. Now scientists continue to debate when clothing truly began. Some estimates suggest humans first donned stitched outfits around 100,000 years ago or more. Evidence even comes from lice. Yes, lice. Genetic studies show that clothing lice split from head lice roughly 170,000 years ago, which means people must have been wearing garments long enough for a new parasite to specialize. A little gross, sure, but oddly poetic. Even bugs record human history. Clothing wasn't just about warmth, it was about adaptability. With good clothes, humans expanded into harsher climates, from icy tundra to rainy forests. That adaptability shaped migrations, allowing our species to spread far wider than if we'd relied on bare skin alone. A stitched fur coat was as valuable as a spear. It kept life going when temperatures plunged. And here's the quirky part: clothing also carried beauty. Beads made from shell's teeth or carved bone have been found sewn into garments, hinting at early fashion. This wasn't survival alone, it was self-expression. Imagine someone strutting proudly in a tunic, decorated with shells, while their neighbor mutters, "Show off." We laugh, but the instinct to decorate ourselves runs deep. Whether it's a Stone Age necklace or a modern designer brand, the impulse to say, "Look at me," is timeless. The artistry of clothing also reflects intelligence. To make a garment, you need planning, scraping hides, softening them, cutting shapes, threading sinew, stitching seams. That's multitasking, fine motor control, and patience. It's basically the prehistoric version of textile engineering. And once mastered, its spread evidence of sewn clothing pops up in multiple regions, showing that knowledge was shared, taught, and improved upon. Humor has its place here too. Imagine a novice tailor proudly wearing their new outfit, only to have it fall apart mid-hunt, or a seam ripped in an inconvenient place during a dance around the fire. Those moments of laughter probably helped skills improve. After all, embarrassment is a great teacher. Clothing also became symbolic. Some items may have marked status, age, or role. A cloak trimmed with rare beads, a headdress adorned with feathers, these weren't just practical. They were statements of identity. If burials give us any clue, clothing could even represent spiritual beliefs, wrapping the dead in garments to send them into whatever world lay beyond. So next time you zip up your jacket or pull on a sweater, think of the ingenuity behind it. That act links you to a lineage of people who figured out how to thread sinew through a hole in bone, how to stitch a seam, how to make survival not just possible, but comfortable. Prehistoric humans weren't half-naked brutes. They were skilled designers, turning furs and fibers into technology that carried them across continents. They were smarter, handier, and maybe even more fashionable than we imagine. Imagine the glow of a fire at dusk, its warmth spilling out into the cold night air. At the edge of the circle sits a wolf, eyes glinting, ears twitching, muscles taut. Normally, this is the moment to panic. A wolf near camp spells danger. But instead of raising a spear, one human tosses a scrap of meat. The wolf doesn't attack, it eats. That simple moment, repeated across generations, may have sparked one of the most extraordinary partnerships in history: humans and animals living side by side. We often think of domestication as something modern, but evidence suggests humans began forming bonds with animals at least 15,000 to 30,000 years ago. The first candidate wolves. Archaeological sites contain burials of humans with dog-like creatures, suggesting companionship, not just utility. One grave in Bonn, Germany, held a puppy buried carefully with a child, as though the two were family. It's not just survival we see there, it's affection. Now scientists continue to debate exactly how domestication began. Did humans adopt wolf pups, raising them into loyal companions? Or did bolder wolves begin hanging around camps, scavenging scraps, until both sides found mutual benefit. Either way, what began as cautious tolerance grew into cooperation. Wolves gained steady food and protection. Humans gained sentinels hunting partners, and perhaps even warmth at night. Imagine curling up in a hide blanket with a furry companion pressed close better than any prehistoric heater. Here's the quirky part: dogs may have been our first alarm systems. A rustle in the grass, a low growl from the wolf, and suddenly the whole camp is alert. That's security technology thousands of years before locks or fences. It's almost funny to think our ancestors invented the guard dog long before the guard gate. And it wasn't just wolves. Over time, humans learned to whisper to other animals too: reindeer, goats, cattle. Even before full domestication, there was likely a kind of respect. Hunters understood animal behavior deeply, mimicking calls, predicting migrations, and honoring the creatures they depended on. In some cultures, cave art itself seems to show reverence for animals as spiritual beings, not just food. Picture a hunter whispering to his companions, "Follow the bison herd's path. They will return to this valley when the grass grows again." That's ecological knowledge born from careful observation. Today we might call it wildlife management, but back then it was survival smarts dressed as instinct. Humor undoubtedly crept in too. Imagine the chaos of trying to raise a half-tamed wolf pup in camp. It chews the hide shoes, steals food from the fire, and howls at the worst possible moment. The exasperated look on a parent's face must have been universal. Why did we keep this thing? And yet, out of those messy moments, loyalty was born. The partnership changed everything. With animal allies, hunts became more efficient. Packs of humans and proto-dogs worked together, cornering prey and sharing the feast. That meant more calories, less risk, and deeper trust across species. It's hard not to smile at the thought of the first shared hunt when humans realized, wait, with these four-legged friends, we're unstoppable. And let's not underestimate the emotional side. Companionship, loyalty, and comfort aren't luxuries. They're deeply human needs. The bond between people and animals soothed loneliness, reduced fear, and created a sense of safety. In a dangerous world, that mattered. To bury an animal with love, as some graves show, means prehistoric humans felt something profound: love that crossed the species line. So the next time your dog curls up at your feet, or your cat insists on sitting on your keyboard, remember, this isn't a modern quirk. It's the continuation of a relationship that began tens of thousands of years ago. Prehistoric humans weren't just taming the wild, they were reshaping it with friendship, loyalty, and trust. That choice reveals not brute survival, but the kind of intelligence that understands sometimes the smartest move is to make an ally out of what could have been an enemy. In your mind's eye, picture a hand holding a bone. Not a weapon this time, but a tally stick. Along its edge are notches carefully carved, evenly spaced. They aren't random scratches, they're records. Something was being counted. Something was being remembered. This is where math, in its earliest form, begins to peek through the shadows of prehistory. The famous Ishango bone, found near the headwaters of the Nile, is about 20,000 years old. Along its length are rows of notches that many scholars interpret as tallies of numbers. Some lines even appear to reflect doubling or prime numbers, sparking debates about whether prehistoric people were doing far more than casual counting. Imagine that prime numbers before Pythagoras. Now scientists continue to debate whether these markings were lunar calendars, trading tallies, or mathematical exercises. But no matter what, they are clear evidence of abstract thought. You don't scratch evenly spaced notches into bone unless you've got a system in your head. Think about the intelligence it takes to track time by carving daily marks into wood or bone, then realizing the cycle of the moon matches your tallies. Suddenly, you're not just living in the present, you're predicting the future. You know when the moon will wax again, when seasons will change, when animals might migrate. That's proto-mathematics guiding survival. Here's the quirky part. Math may have begun with chores. Counting goats, bundles of grain, or hunting spears likely sparked the need to keep records. And just like today, mistakes must have happened. Imagine someone arguing, "I swear I had 12 goats yesterday," while their neighbor points at the tally and says, "Nope, 11. The first math disputes may have been about livestock, not geometry. But the story doesn't stop with tally marks. Archaeologists have found notched bones in Europe and Africa that seem to represent calendars tied to lunar cycles, suggesting women may have tracked fertility or seasons long before written history. If true, that makes prehistoric math not only practical, but deeply personal, tied to the rhythms of human life. Now scientists continue to debate how widespread numerical systems were. Did every group have tally sticks, or were some communities simply better at abstract thought? The uneven record makes it hard to say. But what we know for sure is that the seeds of mathematics were already sprouting. And of course, math likely went hand in hand with teaching. Imagine an elder explaining, 1 scratch for today, 2 scratches for tomorrow, 3 for the day after. That's a lesson in sequencing. It's also the foundation of storytelling, numbers turned into rhythm, turned into memory. Humor sneaks in when you imagine someone miscounting badly. A hunter holds up fingers, loses track, halfway shrugs and says plenty. The group laughs, but someone else carefully scratches the right tally into bone. That mix of precision and play is exactly how humans still learn. Even architecture and hunting relied on numerical sense. To build a hut, you need symmetry and spacing. To trap an animal, you need to measure distances and patterns. None of this required algebra, but it demanded awareness of shape, order, and quantity, the essence of mathematics. So the next time you look at your phone's calculator app or struggle through taxes, remember math began with scratches on a bone, with humans determined to make sense of cycles, hertz, and time itself. Prehistoric intelligence wasn't limited to fire and spears. It reached into abstraction, into numbers, into the invisible order behind the visible world. In those notches we glimpse minds that counted, predicted, and reasoned. They remind us that intelligence is not just about surviving the present moment. It's about imagining patterns beyond it. And prehistoric humans were already doing exactly that. Now let's leave the land behind for a moment and picture something daring, a small group of prehistoric people standing at the edge of a vast stretch of water. Waves crash against the rocks, gulls circle overhead, and on the horizon lies a faint shadow of land. To cross it seems impossible. Yet somehow, thousands of years before compasses or sails, humans did it. They became seafarers long before history remembers. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans reached islands in Indonesia more than 50,000 years ago, long before farming or writing. That means they had to build watercraft and navigate open seas. These weren't accidents of drifting logs. They were planned voyages requiring construction, courage, and calculation. Picture it, logs lashed together with vines, animal hides stretched as flotation, and paddles carved from wood. Crude to us, but revolutionary to them. Now scientists continue to debate how systematic these early sea crossings were. Were they intentional migrations, or were small groups swept off course and lucky enough to survive? The evidence leans toward intention. Settlement patterns are too widespread to be explained by chance alone. Reaching Australia over 40,000 years ago wasn't luck, it was navigation. Here's the quirky part. Some researchers suggest that prehistoric navigators may have read the sea like a book. They noticed the way waves bounced against islands, the flight patterns of birds, the color of water near reefs. Today, Polynesian wayfinders still use similar techniques, navigating thousands of miles without maps or instruments. It's possible those ancient skills stretch back into deep prehistory, meaning the ocean was less a barrier and more a highway. And don't forget the bravery. It's one thing to chase a mammoth on land. It's another to push a handmade raft into unknown waters. Imagine the moment, hearts pounding, hands gripping paddles, children clinging to mothers, and the horizon looming ahead. That leap of faith wasn't just survival, it was exploration. The same spark that sent astronauts into space once sent barefoot seafarers across waves. Humor fits here too. Picture a raft overloaded with supplies, dried meat, firewood, maybe even a goat suddenly wobbling dangerously. Someone shouts, "Whose idea was this?" while another laughs nervously, trying to balance. Seasickness must have plagued many a voyage, and you can almost hear the groans. "Next time I'm staying on land." Yet they pushed forward stubbornly, courageously. The rewards were immense. New lands meant fresh hunting grounds, fertile valleys, new resources like obsidian or shellfish. Expanding horizons also meant expanding minds. When you realize the world is bigger than your valley, curiosity ignites. That curiosity is intelligence in motion. Even symbolic life tied into seafaring. Shell jewelry traveled vast distances, suggesting that journeys weren't just practical, they carried prestige and meaning. A shell from across the sea wasn't just pretty. It was proof someone had ventured far, braved danger, and returned with treasure. That made them more than a survivor. It made them a storyteller. And perhaps the most profound aspect is, this seafaring shows us that prehistoric humans didn't just live within their environment, they challenged it. They weren't content with what they had. They looked at the horizon and thought, what if that question is the root of exploration, science, and invention? So when you hear someone dismiss ancient people as simple, picture them steering a raft into the spray stars overhead, trusting instincts, memory, and courage. They were navigators, explorers, pioneers, not by accident, but by design. The ocean, vast and unforgiving, didn't stop them. It called to them. And in answering, they proved themselves far smarter, braver, and more determined than history often gives them credit for. Imagine the firelight fading the hunt, complete bellies full, and the night stretching long. This is when stories begin. Words tumble into rhythm, voices rise and fall, and suddenly the darkness is filled with myths, tales of giant beasts, trickster spirits, and ancestors who walked among the stars. Prehistoric humans didn't just live day by day. They invented stories that bound them together, shaped their beliefs, and carried knowledge across generations. Oral tradition was their library, their Netflix, their encyclopedia, all in one. Think about what it takes to keep a story alive without writing. Memory has to be sharp, repetition precise, and performance captivating. An elder might gather children and recount the tale of how the river came to flow, or how the mammoth was tricked by a clever hunter. Each time the story carried not only entertainment, but also survival lessons. If a tale warned of poisonous plants, it wasn't just myth, it was practical wisdom wrapped in narrative. Now scientists continue to debate how far back oral tradition truly stretches. Some argue that certain myths we know today, flood stories, for example, may echo events from tens of thousands of years ago, retold and reshaped through countless mouths. Whether or not that's true, the fact remains oral culture required intelligence and imagination of a high order. Here's the quirky part: storytelling also opened the door for exaggeration. Humans are natural embellishers. A hunt for a deer might transform into a heroic clash with a monstrous beast. Over time, the story grows bigger, funnier, more dramatic, kind of like your uncle, retelling the same fishing story every year. That exaggeration isn't useless. It makes the story memorable, sticky in the mind. And in prehistory, sticky stories saved lives. Storytelling was also a form of social glue. A shared myth wasn't just entertainment. It was identity. We are the people who come from the great tree, one group might say, while another traced its origins to a star. These myths told people who they were, where they belonged, and how to behave. In that sense, prehistoric intelligence wasn't just practical, it was cultural. And the performance mattered. Imagine a storyteller by firelight shadowed hands flicking on the wool voice, rising to mimic the roar of a lion or the whisper of the wind. The children gasp, the adults chuckle knowingly, and the tale weaves everyone into the same emotional space. That's community building through imagination. Humor almost certainly played a role. Not every story was solemn myth. Some were probably comedies, tales of fools who made mistakes, exaggerated mishaps that made the audience roar with laughter. Humor is one of the oldest teaching tools. After all, people remember a funny mistake far more vividly than a dry instruction. Imagine a tale about the hunter who forgot his spear and tried to chase a rabbit barehanded. The audience would howl, and the lesson, don't forget, your tools, would never be lost. Oral tradition also connected to ritual. Stories weren't just told, they were sung, danced, or enacted. The line between myth and performance was thin. A hunt story might blend into a chant before the next real hunt, reinforcing bravery and group unity. In this way, storytelling wasn't just entertainment, it was rehearsal for life. And perhaps the most profound part, storytelling gave humans a way to conquer time. Through stories, ancestors lived on events remained vivid, and lessons stretched far beyond a single lifetime. Intelligence isn't only about solving immediate problems. It's about creating continuity, and prehistoric people did that with their voices. So when you curl up tonight listening to this story, remember that you're participating in one of humanity's oldest traditions. The fire may be replaced by headphones, the cave by your bedroom, but the essence is the same: words flowing into imagination, guiding you into dreams. Prehistoric humans weren't silent brutes. They were storytellers, and in their myths, we hear the first echoes of ourselves. Now the circle closes. We've walked with our ancestors through firelit nights, watched them carve stone, stitch furs, bury their dead, and chart the stars. At every turn, the evidence pushes against the stereotype of primitive brutes. Prehistoric humans were clever, adaptable, and endlessly inventive. And when you strip away the cliches, you see the truth. Their intelligence was not lesser than ours. It was simply expressed in different ways, shaped by their world, rather than by ours. Think of the brain itself. Anatomically, Homo sapiens 40,000 years ago had the same brain size as we do today. That means the capacity for art, music, mathematics, and myth was already there waiting to be exercised. And exercised it was. Cave paintings, bone flutes, tally sticks, and huts of mammoth bone are all proof that creativity, problem-solving, and abstract thought flourished long before written history. Now scientists continue to debate whether Neanderthals and other cousins shared this full spectrum of intelligence. Some argue Homo sapiens held a special spark. Others insist Neanderthals were equally capable, pointing to jewelry pigments and burials that suggest symbolic thought. Whatever the verdict, the old notion of dull cavemen crumbles under every new discovery. Here's the quirky part. In many ways, prehistoric intelligence might have outshone ours in practicality. Could you track an animal for miles by a broken twig? Could you identify dozens of plants by smell alone? Could you build a waterproof shelter with no nails, no rope, no instructions, just raw material and instinct? Our ancestors could. We may be experts at apps and spreadsheets, but take away electricity, and suddenly their world looks far more advanced than ours. And humor has its place even here. Imagine a group laughing as someone's clumsy spear throw bounces harmlessly off a tree, or groaning when a badly built hut collapses in the rain. Mistakes weren't just endured, they were turned into stories, lessons, even jokes. That laughter echoing through millennia is proof that intelligence isn't only measured in survival, but in joy. At heart, what makes prehistoric humans smarter than we think is not just their tools, art, or math. It's their humanity. They cared for the sick, buried their dead, comforted their children, made music, decorated their clothes, told myths under the stars, and dared to push into seas and lands unknown. That blend of intellect and compassion, curiosity and courage is the same spark we carry today. And so, as we end this journey, let your mind drift back one more time to the firelight. See the faces glow, hear the laughter, feel the warmth of companionship. The people gathered there are not strangers from a distant past. They are us only without Wi-Fi. They remind us that intelligence has always been about more than gadgets. It has always been about imagination, connection, and the will to make meaning in a vast and difficult world. And now, as the last sparks of this story fade, let the rhythm of your breathing slow, the edges of your thoughts soften, and the weight of the day slip away. Our journey through the minds of prehistoric humans shows us not only how clever they were, but also how deeply they lived within the flow of nature, how closely their hearts beat with the rhythms of earth, fire, sky, and one another. In that closeness, there is a kind of peace we can borrow tonight. Imagine yourself by their fire. The logs crackle, embers glow a steady orange, and shadows stretch softly along the cave walls. Around you, people murmur, low voices blending like a lullaby. Someone taps a gentle rhythm on a hollow log, like a heartbeat echoing through the night. You feel the warmth on your face, the cool night air at your back, and you realize you are safe here, safe, warm, and watched over. The stars overhead shine with the same light they once saw. Their eyes followed those same constellations, their hearts lifted by the same mysteries. Let those stars guide you now into rest, their soft glow calming your mind. Each flicker of fire, each glimmer in the sky is an invitation to release tension, to let go of the worries you carried here. Your shoulders grow heavy, your arms relaxed, your breathing deep and slow. The ancient world grows quiet around you. Only the faint chorus of night creatures remains weaving a steady song of stillness. You are connected across time and space to all who ever sought peace in the dark, all who ever listened for comfort in a story, all who ever closed their eyes and trusted the night to carry them into dreams. Rest now. Let sleep gather you gently like a cloak of warmth. Let the fire's glow fade into soft darkness, and let your body sink into calm. The story is complete. The night is yours.